Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of Portuguese dialects. And, you might be thinking, okay, yeah, Portuguese, Portugal, I got it. But get this, we're going way beyond Europe. We're going to explore this incredible linguistic diversity across, well, the entire Lusophone world.
It's amazing how a language, like, in this case, Portuguese, can go on this journey outward from its roots and turn into this incredible tapestry of, like, accents and dialects. It
Yeah.
just shows how interconnected our world truly is, don't you think?
Absolutely. Though I gotta admit, when I hear Lusophone, my brain goes straight to like Portugal, Brazil. And
Mhm.
then, honestly, I kind of blank. Could you maybe unpack that term for us a little bit?
Of course. Lusophone basically just means any country or region where Portuguese is an official language.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got Portugal and Brazil, but we're also talking about places like Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde. It's a whole bunch of countries, mainly in Africa, that all share this Portuguese linguistic heritage.
And each of these places has its own, like, distinct dialect, right? It's not just like a one-size-fits-all Portuguese.
Exactly. Think of it like taking the same base recipe.
Right.
But then you add all these local spices, local flavors. Language, I mean, it's alive. It soaks up influences from the people who use it, from their history, their interactions, everything. That's what makes this so interesting.
So let's take a trip then, shall we? First stop Lusophone Africa. What makes these dialects stand out from, say, European Portuguese?
Well, picture this. Centuries ago, you have these Portuguese explorers landing in Africa, right? And over time, their language starts mixing with the indigenous African languages that were already there. Linguists, they call this language contact. It's basically like a big cultural and linguistic exchange.
So, like, these languages are bumping up against each other, and boom, something totally new is born.
Exactly. Take Angola, for example. You've got Portuguese coming into contact with Bantu languages like Kimbundu and Umbundu. The result, Angolan Portuguese. It borrows words, phrases, even like grammatical structures, all from those Bantu languages.
Can you give us, like, a specific example of that borrowing? What might I hear in Angolan Portuguese that would totally throw me off?
One fascinating example is how they say, like, everyday objects. In standard Portuguese, the word for plate is often prato, right? But in Angola, you might hear ulu pato. You catch that olu at the beginning. That's straight from Kimbundu. It's like their way of making nouns, super common.
So I could literally hear that linguistic fusion, like, in a single word. That's wild. Like, these languages are literally woven together.
Exactly. And it goes way beyond just vocabulary. This blending, it affects how they pronounce things, even the way they build their sentences. It's like each dialect is a living record of this cultural exchange, this adaptation.
Speaking of cultural exchange, Mozambique, right there on the East African coast, they've got Swahili, a major language. Did that have any impact on Mozambican Portuguese?
Oh, absolutely. Mozambique has this long history as a trading hub. And Swahili, being so prominent in East Africa, it definitely left its mark. You'll find Swahili words for all sorts of things, like their customs, their food, even just simple greetings, all blended right into Mozambican Portuguese.
It's incredible how these languages, like, borrowed and adapted to each other, created something totally new. But with all this variation, I'm guessing communication can get a little tricky sometimes.
It's funny. People assume that speakers of different Portuguese dialects can, like, understand each other perfectly all the time. But while they do have that common ancestor language, how well they actually understand each other, well, it really depends on how much exposure they've had to other dialects, how closely related those dialects are, things like that.
So if I learn, say, European Portuguese, I might have some trouble chatting with someone from Mozambique.
There might be a few bumps in the road for sure, but honestly, isn't that part of the fun of language learning? Immersing yourself in those little nuances, those subtle differences. It's like each one tells a story about the place and its people.
You've definitely got me curious about those nuances, but we've got a lot more ground to cover. We're just scratching the surface here in Lusophone Africa, and I know there's a whole world of linguistic diversity waiting for us in Brazil.
Oh, absolutely. Brazil is like a whole other chapter in the story of Portuguese dialects. And trust me, it's a wild ride.
All right, so from the sweeping landscapes of Lusophone Africa, we land in Brazil, a country that just screams vibrant culture. I'm ready to dive into this world of Brazilian Portuguese dialects.
Oh, you're in for a treat. Brazil is like this kaleidoscope of accents. Each one is as unique and diverse as, well, the different regions of the country itself. It's really incredible. It's like a testament to their history. Brazil is this melting pot of, well, indigenous languages, European colonialism, waves of immigrants over centuries.
That's true. And when I think of like Brazilian Portuguese, the first thing that pops into my head is that sing-song quality, almost like musical. Is there a specific dialect that really captures that?
You're probably thinking of the carioca accent from Rio de Janeiro. Those sunny beaches, that infectious samba rhythm, that laid-back vibe. It's all right there in how they speak.
It's like their accent is dancing.
Right.
What is it that makes it so musically distinct?
Well, one of the key things is how they pronounce the S, especially at the end of words. So instead of a sharp S, it's more like it softens, almost like a shh, gives it that breezy, almost whispery feel.
Hmm.
And they tend to draw out their vowels, so it creates this natural melody to their speech.
Wow. So it's not just what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. It's like every part of their culture is woven into the language.
Exactly. And it goes beyond pronunciation. Think about their vocabulary. Cariocas, they're known for their slang. Really colorful and often with African roots, which speaks to the influence of Brazil's African heritage.
It's amazing how these little linguistic fingerprints can tell you so much about a place, their history, their influences, everything. So if the Carioca accent is like the sound of Rio, what other sonic landscapes can we find as we travel through Brazil?
Let's head up north to Salvador, Bahia, home of the Baiano accent. This one's close to my heart, I have to say. You'll recognize it instantly. It has this captivating rhythm, heavily influenced by the region's strong Afro-Brazilian roots.
Tell me more about those Afro-Brazilian influences. How do they actually show up in the Baiano accent?
Okay, so picture the rhythmic drumming of candomblé ceremonies. That spiritual tradition with West African origins. It's deeply rooted in Bahia's culture. And that pulsing rhythm, it finds its way right into how they speak. Words flow together, they often drop syllables, sometimes add a little lilt at the end of sentences, creates this unique musical way of speaking.
It's like every sentence has the soul and the history of Bahia poured right into it.
Battle.
Okay, so we've got the relaxed, almost beachy vibes of Rio, the rhythmic flow of Salvador. What other sonic flavors are out there?
Let's switch gears completely. We're going to Sao Paulo, Brazil's economic hub, bustling all business. And the Paulistano accent, well, it's a whole different world from the leisurely paces we've seen so far.
Yeah, São Paulo has that fast-paced energy, that focus on business. I can only imagine their accent matches that.
Absolutely. The Paulistano accent is all about clarity, efficiency, no time to waste. Crisp consonants, less emphasis on those drawn-out vowels. It's like rapid fire compared to the more melodic Carioca or Baiano accents.
Yeah.
It reflects that city's energy, that drive.
I love how these accents, they really capture the personality of their cities, Rio's relaxed charm, Salvador's soulful rhythm, São Paulo's urban efficiency. It's all right there in how they speak. But Brazil's huge? I'm guessing our linguistic journey isn't quite over yet.
You're right. We've only just dipped our toes into the vast ocean of Brazilian Portuguese. Next up, we're hopping over to the islands, Madeira and the Azores. Isolation and history, they've shaped unique Portuguese dialects unlike any we've encountered so far.
So we've explored the beaches of Rio, felt that rhythm in Salvador, and braved the streets of São Paulo, all through, their unique Portuguese dialects. And now we're island hopping, right? What's the story there?
Exactly. And these islands, they're like perfect examples of how, being isolated, having a unique history, it all shapes how a language evolves.
Yeah.
Madeira and the Azores, both Portuguese islands, they're fascinating cases.
Okay, let's start with Madeira. I gotta be honest, my knowledge of Madeiran Portuguese is pretty much limited to Madeira wine. What can you tell us about it?
Well, picture this. You've got this island, right? And for centuries, it's been this crossroads for sailors, merchants, all passing through. They bring goods, sure, but they also bring their languages. And Madeiran Portuguese, it reflects that. It's this blend of mainland Portuguese, but with these hints of like Arabic, African languages, even a little French thrown in. And it creates this incredibly lyrical quality, almost poetic,
Wow, so it's like this linguistic tapestry, all these different cultures that have touched the island, their threads are woven in. What about the Azores? Even more isolated, right? I'm guessing that led to even more unique developments in their Portuguese.
Oh, absolutely. Azorean Portuguese is like stepping back in time, honestly. See, because they're so remote, way out in the Atlantic, they've held onto these old words, these pronunciation patterns that have vanished from mainland Portugal, even Madeira. For example, they still use the LAS sound where continental Portuguese has shifted to a J. So a word like mulher, which means woman, it sounds closer to how it would have centuries ago.
It's amazing, these little echoes of the past preserved in how they speak every day. But I have to ask, with all this diversity, even within just Portuguese, are there times when communication gets tricky?
It's a good question. I mean, there's definitely a common thread, a basic understanding among Portuguese speakers. But yeah, imagine someone from a tiny village in the Azores trying to have a conversation with someone from, say, the heart of São Paulo. There might be some serious head scratching going on.
So how do they bridge that gap? Does everyone learn, like, a standardized version of Portuguese?
Exactly. Standardized Portuguese, often based on the European variety, it acts as this common ground, especially in, formal settings.
Hmm.
Education, media, government. It's like having this shared language that makes sure everyone can understand the big picture, even if their day-to-day speech is full of their own regional
The
flavor.
linguistic balancing act. They get to keep their beautiful regional differences, but still have that shared foundation.
And technology plays a huge role in this these days, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. I'm thinking subtitles on TV shows, those real-time translation apps, all that. It must make it easier to experience these different dialects without hitting too many communication roadblocks.
Exactly. We can engage with this richness even if we haven't, personally walked the streets of Rio or listened to stories in a Madeiran cafe. It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. The amount of history, the culture, the human connection, all wrapped up in how people talk. It's amazing. As we wrap up, any final thoughts? What's one big takeaway you hope listeners will keep in mind?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that language isn't this fixed, unchanging thing. It's always evolving. It's shaped by the journeys people take, the cultures they meet, the stories they tell. So the next time you hear someone speaking a different language, or even just a dialect you're not familiar with, really listen. You might be surprised by the stories you uncover, the connections you make, all through the power of language.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those very ideas. Until next time, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep those linguistic adventures alive.